All right, so we're back, and today we're really going to deep dive into some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah.
The world of superstimuli.
Wow.
And, you sent over this really interesting conversation between Dr. Jordan Peterson and Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Mm-hmm.
And it really got me thinking, they were talking about how things like pornography and processed foods
Right.
can hijack our brains
Yeah.
in a way that, natural stimuli just don't.
Yeah.
Have you ever gotten that feeling like, you just can't stop scrolling?
Totally.
Or you finish like a bag of chips and somehow you still feel hungry?
All the time.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
It's so interesting how they approach this from like these different angles, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Peterson with like his psychological lens, and then Dr. Huberman coming at it from neuroscience.
Yeah.
But they both like land on this idea of superstimuli as a way to understand why these things can have such a grip on us.
Okay, so let's break out this superstimuli concept.
Okay.
Dr. Peterson uses this example of stickleback fish.
Right.
I thought it was really illuminating.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm not a fish, but
Sure.
hear me out.
Yeah, so stickleback fish, they're naturally territorial, right?
Right.
They get aggressive when they see the red bellies of other males.
Oh.
But researchers found that if you show them an even bigger, brighter red dot, like a supernormal stimulus,
Wow.
they go absolutely bonkers.
Wow.
Way more aggressive than they would be in a natural setting.
So it's like taking something that already triggers a response.
Right.
And then like dialing it up to 11.
Exactly, and that's where the parallel with pornography comes in.
Okay.
Dr. Peterson and Dr. Huberman argue that, like, today's pornography with its constant accessibility and intensity is like that giant red dot for the stickleback fish.
Okay.
It provides a level of visual stimulation that far exceeds anything encountered in the real world.
Yeah.
Especially for young men who are just starting to explore their sexuality.
Yeah. I can see how that could be a problem.
Totally.
Especially when you consider how impressionable like young minds are.
Yeah.
But how does this all tie into dopamine and our reward system?
Right.
It's not just about like feeling good, right?
Definitely not. Dopamine is key here.
Okay.
But it's more than just the pleasure molecule. It's deeply involved in like motivation and learning.
Okay.
So when we do something rewarding, dopamine is released and it strengthens the neural pathways associated with that experience, making us want to do it again.
Okay.
Think of it like carving a path through a forest. The more you walk it, the clearer and more defined it becomes.
Okay, so the more you engage with pornography,
Yeah.
the more those pathways get carved out.
Exactly.
Leading to stronger cravings.
Yeah.
It's like you're training your brain to seek out that specific kind of stimulation.
Precisely. And this is where it starts to mirror the cycle of addiction.
Oh, wow.
The constant dopamine hits create this feedback loop where certain personality traits and behaviors, those geared towards seeking that specific reward, start to dominate.
Right.
It can be really hard to break free.
And this is where Dr. Huberman's gas station story comes in, right?
Absolutely.
The one where he realized how much processed food is engineered to trigger that same dopamine rush.
Totally. He described this moment of clarity where he like looked around and saw how every item from the sugary drinks to the salty snacks was essentially designed to maximize dopamine release.
Wow.
It's like a constant bombardment of superstimuli specifically targeting our reward pathways.
So we're being primed to crave these things even when we're not actually hungry.
Yeah.
No wonder it's so hard to resist that second bag of chips.
That's exactly the point. And what's even more fascinating is how this constant bombardment can actually mess with our natural satiation mechanisms.
What?
The signals that tell our brains we've had enough.
You mean like feeling full after a meal?
Exactly. When we eat whole, unprocessed foods, our gut sends clear signals to our brain, particularly through gut neurons sensitive to essential amino acids. Our brain learns to associate these signals with the taste and nutrient content of the food, leading to a feeling of satiety.
So it's like our gut and brain are having this conversation about what our body needs and when we've had enough.
Right. But processed foods with their complex mix of ingredients and artificial flavors disrupt that conversation. The brain struggles to decipher the signals leading to continued eating, even when we've consumed enough calories.
So even though our body might be saying, like, stop, I'm full, our brain is still searching for that satisfying signal it's used to getting from real food.
It's like our brains are stuck on a hedonic treadmill. We keep chasing that dopamine rush. But the satisfaction is fleeting, and we end up wanting more and more.
Okay, so we've got pornography rewiring our brains towards specific types of visual stimulation
Yeah.
and processed food hijacking our society signals.
Right.
Sounds like a recipe for trouble.
It can be, especially when you consider the long-term consequences that we're only beginning to understand.
Yeah?
Both Dr. Peterson and Dr. Huberman raise serious concerns about how these superstimuli might be affecting our relationships, our mental health, and even our overall well-being.
So what can we do about it?
Right.
Are we doomed to be slaves to these superstimuli?
Yeah.
Or is there a way to regain control?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore further in this deep dive.
Okay.
It's not about eliminating all pleasure or living like a monk,
Right.
but about understanding how these superstimuli work and making conscious choices that align with our values and goals.
Okay, so maybe there's hope after all.
Yeah.
This is getting really interesting.
For sure.
But before we get into solutions, I want to unpack this idea of how pornography might be specifically impacting young men's relationships.
Yeah.
We'll dive into that right after this.
So, one of the things that really struck me in this conversation was the concern that Dr. Peterson and Dr. Huberman raised about how pornography might be warping young men's expectations of real-life intimacy.
That's a pretty heavy thought.
It is.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. They suggest that constant exposure to pornography, especially the kind that's readily available online,
Right.
could create a disconnect between what young men see on screen and what they experience in actual relationships.
I see.
It's like they're being conditioned to expect a certain level of intensity and visual stimulation that real-life intimacy just can't replicate.
I see what you mean. Real-life relationships are messy and complicated.
Right.
With all sorts of emotional nuances that you don't get from watching a screen.
Exactly. And there's a concern that this disconnect could lead to unrealistic expectations, making it harder for young men to form healthy, fulfilling relationships.
That makes sense. It's like comparing a highly edited Hollywood action movie to like a real-life fist fight.
Right.
They might both involve fighting.
Right.
But the context and the stakes are completely different.
That's a great analogy. And beyond the issue of expectations, Dr. Peterson and Dr. Huberman also talked about the potential for pornography to foster a preference for voyeurism over real-life connection.
You mean like watching from the sidelines instead of actively participating?
Right. The concern is that repeated exposure to pornography, where the viewer is always in a passive observing role, could make real-life intimacy, which requires vulnerability and active engagement, less appealing.
That's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like the more you get used to watching a play,
right,
the less interested you become in actually being on stage yourself.
Exactly. And this is especially concerning when you consider the plasticity of young brains.
Okay.
Their neural pathways are still forming.
Right.
So the experiences they have during this critical period can have a lasting impact on their behavior and preferences later in life.
So we're talking about potential long-term consequences.
Yeah.
That we don't fully understand yet?
Yeah.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is, and that's why Dr. Peterson and Dr. Huberman emphasize the importance of having open and honest conversations about these issues.
Right.
We need to equip young people with the knowledge and tools to make informed choices about their media consumption and their sexual development.
Because ultimately, we want them to experience the full richness and depth of human connection.
Yeah.
Not just the fleeting thrills of superstimuli.
Absolutely. It's about empowering them to find genuine satisfaction and fulfillment in their lives, which often involves navigating complexity and embracing vulnerability.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem.
Right.
But what about solutions?
Yeah.
Is there a way to break free from this cycle of superstimuli and reclaim our agency?
There is, and it starts with awareness.
Okay.
The first step is recognizing that these superstimuli exist and understanding what they operate.
So it's about becoming more mindful of the things that trigger that dopamine rush.
Exactly.
Like noticing when we're reaching for that bag of chips out of habit rather than genuine hunger.
Pay attention to how your body and mind respond to different types of stimulation.
Okay.
Notice what makes you feel genuinely good versus what leaves you feeling empty or dissatisfied.
So we need to develop our sort of superstimulus radar to help us navigate this world.
I like that analogy, being able to identify the things that are specifically designed to hijack our attention and trigger those dopamine loops can help us make more conscious choices about how we engage with them.
It's about reclaiming our agency And not letting these external forces dictate our desires and behaviors.
Exactly. It's about becoming the architects of our own experience.
Yeah.
Rather than passive consumers of whatever stimulation is thrown our way.
Okay.
And, Dr. Peterson and Dr. Huberman both talk about the importance of recalibrating our reward systems.
Recalibrating. What does that look like in practice?
It's about intentionally reducing our exposure to super-stimuli.
Okay.
And resensitizing ourselves to the more subtle pleasures of real-life experiences.
So like spending time in nature.
Yeah.
Having meaningful conversations, savoring a home-cooked meal.
Right.
Those activities start to feel more rewarding again.
Precisely. It's like resetting our taste buds, so to speak.
Yeah.
When we're not constantly bombarded with intense flavors and sensations,
Right.
we can appreciate the nuances of more natural experiences.
And how does this apply to the issue of pornography
Right.
and its impact on young men?
It's about encouraging them to explore a wider range of experiences.
Okay.
And to find fulfillment beyond the screen. Engaging in activities that foster real-life connection.
Yeah.
Like joining a sports team, pursuing creative hobbies.
Right.
Or simply spending time with loved ones.
Okay.
Can help recalibrate their reward systems.
Yeah.
And develop a healthier relationship with pleasure.
It's about helping them see that there's more to life than just chasing that dopamine rush.
Exactly. It's about showing them that genuine fulfillment comes from connection, meaning, and purpose.
That's really empowering. It's like we're not just helpless passengers on this super stimulus train.
Right.
We actually have the ability to take control and steer ourselves in a different direction.
Exactly. And the rewards of living a more conscious and intentional life are immeasurable.
Right.
It's about rediscovering the simple joys of being human. The joy of connection, the satisfaction of meaningful work, the wonder of experiencing the world with fresh eyes.
I love that it's like we're reclaiming our humanity in a world that's trying to turn us into dopamine-seeking machines.
That's a great way to put it. And, one thing we haven't talked about much is the potential for these super stimuli to actually hinder our ability to find genuine satisfaction in life.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, when our brains are constantly bombarded with these intense hits of dopamine, it can raise our baseline level of stimulation.
Okay.
So this means that ordinary, everyday experiences start to feel dull and unsatisfying in comparison.
Right.
It's like we've developed a tolerance to pleasure, and we need increasingly stronger doses to feel anything at all.
So it's like we're numbing ourselves to the beauty and richness of life by
Totally.
constantly seeking out these artificial highs.
Exactly. And the irony is that by chasing these super stimuli, we're actually making it harder to experience genuine happiness and fulfillment.
That's a profound insight. It's like we're trading long-term contentment for short-term thrills and ending up empty-handed in the process.
Right. But the good news is that we can reverse this trend.
Okay.
By consciously reducing our exposure to superstimuli and resensitizing ourselves to the more subtle pleasures of life.
Yeah.
We can reclaim our capacity for joy and find deep satisfaction in the ordinary moments.
So it's not about becoming aesthetics or denying ourselves all forms of pleasure.
Not at all. It's about finding a healthy balance.
Right.
A way to engage with pleasure that nourishes our souls and allows us to appreciate the full spectrum of human experience.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light.
That's great to hear. And remember, this is just the beginning of the journey. The more we learn about these super stimuli and how they operate, the better equipped we are to navigate the complexities of modern life and create a world where genuine human flourishing is possible.
I love that. So for all of you listening out there, take a moment to consider the super stimuli in your own life.
Yeah.
What are the things that are hijacking your attention and preventing you from experiencing true satisfaction?
Right.
And more importantly, what steps can you take to reclaim your agency and create a life that's rich, meaningful, and filled with genuine joy?
It's a journey worth taking.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of super stimuli. Until next time, keep seeking those real-life rewards. They're out there waiting to be discovered.